She smirked over the rim of her wine glass. The restaurant was dim, too polished for anything spontaneous, but she'd chosen it like she always did, like every detail was a performance. "You still believe in loyalty?" Her voice was casual, but her eyes didn't match it. They sharpened, not with curiosity, but with something closer to challenge, like she wasn't asking a question, like she already knew the answer and wanted to watch him admit it out loud. I nodded, once. Didn't speak. She laughed. Not the breathy, familiar one I remembered from the first few years, no. This one was thinner, measured. "How quaint," she said, setting her glass down with too much care. She didn't break eye contact. I didn't correct her, just sat still, absorbing the weight of it. That word, quaint. Like loyalty was an antique she'd found in my pocket and wanted me to be embarrassed about. I should have known then. Maybe I did. Maybe some part of me had been watching the slow pivot for longer than I'd admit. She stood before dessert, said she needed to meet a friend. The kiss she pressed to my cheek was soft, efficient, and empty. I watched her walk through the tall glass doors and into the blur of city lights. She didn't look back. That was the night something in me stopped hoping for warmth and started listening for signals instead. Not the words she said, but the spaces between them. The places where honesty used to live. I drove home slow. The silence in the car had weight to it, like something sitting in the passenger seat. I thought about her question again. "Do you still believe in loyalty?" And the smirk she wore when she asked it. She thought it made me naive. Maybe it did, but I believed in things staying true, in not switching masks just because the scene changed. And I believed foolishly that she did too. The night felt colder once I got inside. Her scent still lingered near the hallway mirror. Lavender and faint smoke. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to decide whether that night was an outlier or a signal. The next morning she made coffee like nothing happened, smiled, laughed at something on her phone, the same laugh, the same softness I once loved, like she hadn't tested the edge of a blade against my values the night before. False normalcy is its own kind of cruelty, and I wasn't ready to call it a betrayal yet, but something had shifted, not in her, in me. I stopped listening to her words and started watching her patterns. There's a kind of cold that doesn't come from distance, it comes from ridicule. And once you've felt it, every memory starts to sting differently. She didn't just grow detached. That would have been easier to excuse. A change in tone, less interest in small touches, fading conversations. Those things could be written off as exhaustion, stress, anything temporary. But this was different. This was mockery. It crept in slow. At first, it showed up as sarcastic comments over dinner, remarks about people who still believe in happily ever afters while slicing into perfectly seared salmon. I'd smile, play along, try not to read too deeply. But she watched me when she said those things. Watched how I reacted, like she was testing the water for something deeper. Every time I stood firm, on principles, on honesty, on showing up for each other, she leaned back, figuratively and literally. She'd fold her arms, tilt her head, and smile like I was quoting from a rule book that no longer applied. But she never leaned far enough away to look like a traitor. Not yet. That was her skill, hovering right at the edge of plausibility. 1 foot in affection, 1 foot in distance. Just enough warmth to keep the air breathable. Just enough presence to keep me uncertain. She'd reach for my hand in public, then spend the whole drive home texting someone else. She'd compliment me to friends, then call me predictable when we were alone. That word came up more than once. Predictable. As if steadiness was a flaw. I once caught her scrolling through old photos of us on her phone. I asked what she was thinking. She didn't flinch, just said, "Funny how we thought this would be enough." That sentence stayed with me. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the calm way she said them. No sadness, no nostalgia, just a quiet erasure of everything we'd built. I wasn't angry, not then. I just felt cold, like I was being slowly rewritten in her narrative, less partner, more footnote. And the worst part was that she did it with a smile, with charm, with subtle misdirection that left me questioning my own perceptions. I started noticing how she shifted in conversations, how often she interrupted when I brought up something meaningful, how quickly she'd redirect any compliment back toward herself, like she was reminding me where the attention belonged. It wasn't open betrayal. It was something more corrosive, contempt disguised as cleverness. I wasn't a fool, not entirely, but I still wasn't ready to name it betrayal. Not when she still curled up beside me at night. Not when her perfume lingered on my shirts. Not when she still called me love on speakerphone where others could hear. But I stopped expecting warmth. And I started archiving these moments like puzzle pieces, waiting for the picture to form. It happened on a Thursday. Quiet evening, nothing dramatic. I was sorting through invoices at the dining table, her idea, this shared financial transparency, when my phone buzzed with a notification from a group we both used to be part of. A shared acquaintance had posted a string of photos from a corporate fundraiser. She told me she wasn't going. Too many politics, she said. It's just a photo op for the board members. She waved it off with that dismissive charm she used whenever she wanted me to stop asking questions. I believed her. I tapped the post out of habit, not expectation. The caption was vague, something about industry partnerships and growth, but the third photo stopped me cold. Blurred background, harsh lighting, her unmistakably and not alone. She stood too close to a man I recognized, not a friend, not a stranger. He worked at her firm, one of the senior consultants. I'd seen him once at a holiday event, heard her complain about how weird his fashion sense was. She joked about his long wool coat, said it made him look like he was playing dress-up. She was wearing that coat in the photo. The irony wasn't lost on me. The image was grainy, but the posture was clear. Her body angled toward him, his hand just grazing her back, not a friendly distance, not professional. I didn't save the photo, didn't need to. It was already burning into memory. For a long moment I just stared at the screen. I scrolled through the comments. Nothing helpful. Nothing direct, just industry talk and congratulations. Nobody else seemed to notice, or maybe they all knew and chose silence. Either way, it was a leak, a crack in the version of her I'd been handed. She got home late that night, claimed she'd been meeting an old classmate for dinner, finally catching up after months. Her lipstick was still intact. Her laugh was bright. She asked how the invoices were going. I said they were fine. I didn't mention the photo. I didn't show her the post. I smiled, poured her a drink, and said, "Glad you made it back safe." And I meant it, because that night I started the quiet process of watching her in earnest, not as a partner, as a subject. I stopped asking questions, stopped looking for warmth, started mapping her inconsistencies. She had no idea the investigation had begun, that I was cataloging her timelines, comparing receipts, listening not to what she said but to the gaps in what she didn't. Trust hadn't ended in that moment. But belief unraveled, and once belief cracks, it doesn't take long for the rest to follow. It's strange how quickly silence can become an accomplice. Her friend stopped speaking to me directly. Not rudely, not all at once, but gradually, like fog rolling in. Messages that used to arrive daily thinned to emojis. Invitations dried up. Mutual conversations turned into carefully edited summaries. I wasn't just being excluded. I was being rewritten. I first heard it from someone who hadn't gotten the memo yet, someone who still assumed I was part of the story. We bumped into each other outside a bookstore, shared the usual pleasantries, and then, with a hesitant smile, she said, "I heard you're going through a rough patch." She says you're stuck in a different decade, that you're still loyal to things no one else even remembers. She said it like it was a gentle observation, like she was handing me a soft version of the truth. I nodded, thanked her for her honesty, and walked away feeling like the floor had tilted. Not because she said it, but because it confirmed something I hadn't wanted to admit. My values weren't just outdated in her eyes. They were liabilities. The next week, another acquaintance closer to me than to her reached out quietly. His words were sharper. "She's planning an exit," he said, "but she's trying to control the narrative. She wants to make it look mutual, like she evolved and you didn't." I didn't respond right away. I sat with that. So this was the shape of it. She was using my steadiness, my reliability, as a platform to leap from. I'd become the stable backdrop that made her new direction look bold and intentional. She needed me there to contrast against, but only long enough to rehearse the break. And the man in the photo, he wasn't the destination. He was the mattress, the test run, her exit strategy with padding beneath it. I started noticing new patterns then. She'd leave the house saying she had a client mixer, but come back with no follow-up stories. No names, no photos, just silence and the faintest smell of someone else's cologne clinging to her scarf. She still acted warm, still curled up beside me with scripted affection, but it was muscle memory now, not connection, not presence. Her smile had become an act, and the overlap was no longer subtle. One night she missed a call while we were watching something on the couch. Her screen lit up. I wasn't trying to spy, but I saw the name, first name only. Generic, forgettable, but her reaction was, she froze, didn't reach for the phone, didn't explain. I said nothing. That silence, that was when I knew, not just that something was happening, but that she believed I wouldn't act, that I was predictable. She debuilt her risk-taking around that belief. She rehearsed her independence while I walked her dog, paid our bills, managed the calendar we still shared. She was already halfway out the door, but she needed me to hold it open long enough for her story to land clean. That was her mistake. She thought loyalty meant paralysis, but I wasn't frozen. I was documenting, preparing. And when the time came, I wouldn't be holding the door open. I'd be closing it, quietly, permanently. The realization didn't come like a lightning strike. It came like erosion. Slow, relentless, and irreversible. I'd started going back through old charges on our joint card. Not out of suspicion at first, just routine. But something caught my eye. Multiple charges listed as client event expenses. All logged on evenings. I remembered her claiming exhaustion, staying in, or making some offhand comment about catching up on emails. The vendor names were too vague to verify. Boutique restaurants, car service apps, upscale lounges. But the dates matched a troubling pattern. Always the same nights she encouraged me to stay home and relax, told me she didn't need company, or suggested I take a break from our usual routines. One night I found a bill for a hotel bar 3 cities over. I asked her casually the next morning where she'd been that night. She didn't blink. Late client dinner, she said, sipping her coffee. You'd hate those things, small talk and posturing. She reached over, brushed her fingers against mine. Thanks for letting me recharge afterward. I smiled. Said nothing, but I pulled the itemized receipt later, 2 drinks, a meal, and a valet charge she never mentioned. Not one name I recognized from her firm. That's when I started compiling the full ledger, cross-referencing her client events with my own calendar, moments when I'd stayed behind to manage the house, the paperwork, the dog she begged to adopt but rarely walked herself. She always described me as rock solid to friends. I finally understood why. I was her alibi. My routines, the gym, the grocery runs, the weekend maintenance tasks, I was a walking proof of stability. A fixed point she could point to and say, see, I'm grounded, I'm loyal, I'm not chasing chaos. She used my schedule as the backdrop to her reinvention. While I was running point on the finances and coverage, she was field testing a new identity. She had made me her cover story. That hurt in a way nothing else had. It wasn't just betrayal, it was usage. Strategic, calculated usage. She wasn't escaping from me, she was escaping through me. And the more I reviewed, the clearer it became. She'd been careful, not sloppy, not arrogant. Everything structured to ride just below the threshold of suspicion, except one thing. She billed the wrong card just once. A dinner logged as client event finance was charged to our personal card. She hadn't switched back after buying something earlier that day. I checked the timestamp. 8:52 p.m. Saturday. We'd spoken at 8:30. She'd said she was heading to bed early, wiped from the week. She even thanked me for letting her rest. That was the crack she hadn't sealed, and I didn't confront her, not yet. I stored the receipt, archived the photo, pulled every other statement for the last 6 months, organized them by date, location, and alibi. Then I took the next step I knew would matter most. I went quiet, predictable, yes, but only on the surface. Beneath it, I was preparing to expose the structure she'd built and collapse it with a whisper. She made the mistake of thinking I was still standing still, that my silence was surrender, that I was still clinging to hope. She made one last jab over dinner, a quiet one nestled in the middle of a conversation about nothing. We'd been talking about holiday plans. She stirred her wine with slow circles, then said it without looking up. You'd never leave. Guys like you stay loyal, even when we stop pretending. She didn't even flinch when she said it. Her voice didn't rise. She wasn't picking a fight. She was issuing a verdict. I didn't respond, not right away. I reached down into my coat pocket and slid her second phone across the table. It was quiet, no theatrics, just the muted tap of tempered glass against oak. She blinked. No panic, not yet. She glanced at it, then at me. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I tapped the screen. The lock screen lit up and then unlocked. I'd seen the code once when she thought I was asleep. 6 digits, a birth date not mine. The phone opened directly to a thread. I scrolled slowly until I found the message. I tilted the screen toward her and left it there. "He still hasn't caught on. I swear it's like dating a priest. No commentary, no accusation. I simply let it sit there in the space between us." Her eyes didn't widen. Her mouth didn't drop. She didn't reach to snatch it away. She just looked at it, then looked at me. Her face didn't fall. It hardened. She leaned back, fingers wrapping around the base of her wine glass. No apology, no panic, no spin. "So that's what this is." It wasn't a question. I waited a moment, then finally spoke, quiet, calm. "You used me, not for connection, but for convenience. I was your background noise while you rehearsed your exit, and you called it strength." Her fingers twitched. "You crossed into something that was mine." I let a pause stretch between us. "You forfeited privacy when you used our shared life to fund a separate one." Still no apology, just stillness. The mask didn't crack, it slid. The expression that replaced it wasn't shame, it was calculation. She was already thinking about how to frame this next, but I wasn't interested in framing. I stood, picked up the phone, and slid it back into my coat. "This wasn't about catching you. This was about ending the story clean." Her voice followed me before I reached the door. "You think silence makes you strong?" I stopped, turned halfway back. "No," I said, "but truth does." And then I left her sitting there, surrounded by empty wine glasses and a script that no longer worked. I didn't make a scene. I didn't post screenshots. I didn't issue warnings or pleas for sympathy. I just removed her access cleanly, methodically, and without a single announcement. The shared calendar disappeared first. Then her email lost access to my cloud documents, our tax folders, the joint storage we once used to plan vacations. Group chats went cold. She didn't get removed, people just stopped tagging her. They stopped replying to her like before. She wasn't exiled. She was left alone with her version of the story. And too many people now had reasons to question it. Screenshots existed. I hadn't shared them widely, just with those who asked gently, hesitantly. A few friends she assumed would shield her reached out to me privately. "I didn't know it was like that," one said. "She made it sound like you'd given up on her emotionally," said another. "I never corrected her version directly. I didn't need to." Silence, as it turns out, spreads faster than outrage. It unsettles people, makes them look harder. I heard from fewer of her friends after that. The ones who used to flood comment threads with affirmations and inside jokes went quiet. Her phone, I imagined, started ringing less. Her closest circle had once called me dependable, sometimes with a hint of condescension. Now they just left me out entirely. But the bigger fallout wasn't in whispers, it was in access. Her streaming accounts logged out. The subscription services stopped billing from our card. I reclaimed my digital life, one password at a time. The joint lease, I bought her out, quietly, legally. The paperwork filed before she even realized I'd made an appointment. She received the documents via courier. Her car. It was never truly hers. I had co-signed the financing under my name. When she missed the first solo payment, the warning notice went to my inbox. I paid it, then sold it 2 weeks later. I left her the option to reclaim it. She didn't take it. The dog she never walked stayed with me. Every part of our life that relied on mutual coordination was severed. Because mutuality had been a myth, I was the scaffolding. Once removed, her structure leaned in the wrong direction. I don't know what she told people after that. What I do know is that her curated image, the one she presented as brave, redefined, forward-moving, started to fade. Her posts turned vague, her captions less certain. And then, one afternoon, her best friend reposted a quote I hadn't seen in years. A quote she used to roll her eyes at. "Loyalty isn't weakness, it's proof." No tag, no comment, but I knew she saw it, and I knew it burned. The worst part wasn't that she left. It was how she practiced leaving before she ever walked out. I learned more in the weeks after the confrontation than I ever had during the months of her deception. Not through spying, just through the space her absence created. Gaps filled themselves when no one was holding the illusion together anymore. An old colleague of hers, someone who once called me the stable one, reached out discreetly. Said he didn't want to get involved but figured I deserved to know the version of the story she didn't control. According to him, it wasn't about the other man, not really. She told people it wasn't serious, he said. She just wanted to see what it would feel like being free. She said you'd be fine, that you were built for survival. The phrasing landed like a slap. I was built for survival, not love. Not partnership, just endurance. I wasn't a man, I was the fallback. Someone she could lean on recklessly without long-term consequence. Her backup plan in motion. Her landing pad if independence turned out to be harder than expected. She didn't fall in love with him. She relied on him for a version of herself she didn't want to try out on her own. To try out a new version of herself. One who could flirt with risk, play with fire, and still claim dignity because someone else, me, was holding the safety net. She picked someone forgettable, strategic. Someone who could disappear once his part in her rehearsal ended. He wasn't an escape. He was insurance. I never met him. Never cared to. I knew enough. He was the coat in the photo. The valet ticket on the receipt. The wine glass in the bar 3 cities over. He was convenient anonymity. The opposite of what I represented. What struck me hardest wasn't jealousy. It was the clinical detachment. She didn't cross lines for passion. She recalibrated her loyalty based on logistics. The betrayal wasn't messy, it was structured. She tested her exit like a product launch, monitored the response, evaluated the optics, all while using my name, my presence, my loyalty as evidence of her supposed balance. And when she saw that it might work, that she could rewrite the story with just enough ambiguity, she leaned in. She never looked back at me because she assumed I would always be there, that I would be waiting. Still and steady the way I always was. She underestimated one thing. Loyalty isn't the same as submission. And once a loyal man is forced to see what loyalty costs, it doesn't return, it dissolves permanently. Once the curtain dropped, I didn't chase. I calculated. Every piece of our shared life had been shaped by trust, my trust. And every piece was now a point of exposure. I didn't just remove her access. I made sure there was nothing left she could quietly reach for once she realized the applause had stopped. First, the subscriptions. Streaming software, shared delivery services, canceled or reassigned. She'd always joked that she didn't know where anything was stored because I was so much better with that stuff. It stopped being funny the day her password stopped working. She tried logging back in. I saw the failed attempt notifications. One at 9:13 a.m., then again at 10:47. A third at 1:12 p.m., each one from a familiar device. None of them succeeded. Then came the bank accounts. We'd had joint savings created when things felt permanent. I'd stopped contributing to it 2 months before the confrontation, quietly. Redirected funds, opened private lines. I left the balance untouched until the moment came. Then I withdrew it. Not in anger, in finality. Our credit cards were next. I removed my name from anything with her on it. Blocked transfers. Notified the issuers. They didn't ask questions. Paperwork speaks louder than emotion. The lease signed jointly was easy. I'd spoken to the landlord 2 weeks before she even knew I was moving. Bought her out quietly. Had her name removed. Left her a printed copy of the new lease with a clean release clause and a note. No unpaid balances. No further contact needed. The car. That took her longer to notice. She liked to say it was hers, posted pictures of it often, but it was. The title was under my name. She never asked about it because she assumed it didn't matter. I had it collected the day after the lease was transferred. She called once, just once. I didn't answer. She didn't call again. Her second phone was shut off the same week. I never touched it again after the confrontation. I didn't need to. She stopped using it after her network started thinning. The consequences weren't revenge. They were restoration. For months I'd carried her weight, paid for the structure that allowed her to wander. And when it collapsed, I didn't shout. I cleared the debris. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't show up, she simply faded. The way stories do when no one's reading them anymore. At first she tried to pivot. She shifted her tone online, subtle changes, curated ambiguity. A few moody posts about growing alone, some cryptic captions about truth being subjective. Nothing explicit, She never named me. That would have broken the illusion. She wanted to stay vague enough to harvest sympathy from both sides. But the internet doesn't forget, and it certainly doesn't forgive calculated storytelling when the cracks start showing. Her empowerment posts stopped landing. The comments grew thinner. Her friends, the loud ones, the constant cheerleaders, weren't echoing her anymore. No more flames or hearts in response to her late-night selfies. No more praise about her bravery. Even her stories started missing names. Where there used to be snapshots of crowded brunches and smiling faces, now there were empty plates, blurred glasses, filters layered so thick they couldn't hide the absence. Then came the untagging. The man from the fundraiser, the one who hovered beside her in that coat she once mocked, he pulled the digital thread first, deleted old photos, removed her tag from 2 event albums, changed his profile to private. It wasn't a declaration, it was a deletion. I didn't smile. I didn't feel vindicated. I just noted it like another domino falling without needing a push. And then, without warning, the friend she used to call her twin soul, the same one who once laughed with her over wine while I handled cleanup, posted a single quote, black text on a white square. Loyalty isn't weakness, it's proof. No caption, no hashtag, no context. But everyone who had been watching understood. She saw it. I know because she still followed that account. She didn't like the post, didn't respond publicly. But that was the first day she went quiet for more than 48 hours. No posts, no stories, no soft rebranding, just digital silence. Because perception, once lost, doesn't ask for permission to turn. It just does. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't the one being scrutinized. I was the one being left alone. And that was the beginning of peace. The last message came late. Almost midnight, a time that used to mean vulnerability for her. A glass of wine in hand, the TV low, legs curled under a blanket she never remembered to fold. That was the hour she used to let her guard down, when her voice softened, when she'd lean her head on my shoulder like gravity made more sense there. Now it was just a blinking notification. You really think silence makes you strong? No name, no greeting, just that. I didn't open it. Didn't need to. The read receipt stayed gray. She'd always been a master of timing. Knew how to throw a last line jab just as a scene was ending. But this time there was no scene left. No audience. No performance space. She was shouting into a theater that had already gone dark. I didn't reply because silence wasn't the message. It was the result. She had mistaken loyalty for submission. Had used my steadiness as a set piece in her exit script. And when she finally stood in the spotlight alone, it must have surprised her how cold the stage felt without applause. Her story didn't implode. It wore down into silence. No scandals, no dramatic public fallout, just a slow quieting of echoes, a fading spotlight. She tested risk, expected me to be nearby with a safety net. And when the flames turned inward, licking at the edges of her carefully framed reinvention, she reached for the old version of me, the dependable man who always picked up, always soothed, always helped her reset. But I wasn't there. I wasn't proving anything. I was finished listening. The strongest thing I ever did wasn't leaving. It was letting her sit in the version of herself she'd built without me, and letting her feel how little of it could hold.